Well, that's sort of the theme song to our book lunch. I hope the sound is okay. Laurie Strickland, our ace producer, should be in the chat, and as well as her companion and guide, Chester, a golden retriever. I hope that's all going on right now. So, anyhow, get a little more serious. This is the 5th episode of our series on John Updike's rabbit novels. And this will be the next to last. So there's this episode, and then we're going to do a 6th. And after number 6, with number 6, we will conclude the series. I should talk a little bit, move over to my chair, about where we're at. And I'm going to get out my TV in a few minutes and show some clips of the man himself, John Updike, talking about the inspiration for his overall oeuvre, right? His themes and concerns. It's not going to be a long clip. It's just a little snippet, a little excerpt. Last week, we talked about John Cheever and John Updike because they were on the Dick Cavett show, and I compared those authors. And so this episode, we're going to continue and finish, hopefully, Rabbit at Rest. His chronicle of the 80s up till 1991. As you know, is a novel every 10 years. And as I said in our last episode, this is a survey, in a way, a sociologically detailed survey of America in those years that I'm calling alternately, sometimes I call it the liberal democratic age, to emphasize that was an age and an order that was coherent. And as I said a little more, hopefully not too tendentiously last episode, it had more good in it than bad, and it was a force for good, even with all of its problems, and that it was sort of a guiding principle of everything, literature and theater and music and popular music in Hollywood. And John Updike is chronicling that period. Of course, as we know, we are now in a rather radically different period currently. But it's interesting to think about. I'm going to show you something here. We've been discussing the New Yorker, and this came in the mail. This is the 100th anniversary, February 2025, and as you can see here, that's the masthead. That's the icon there, the dude with the top hat, and this is, of course, in keeping with my interest in objects in the world that take up volume and mass, and as we'll be discussing, Rabbit at Rest. Even more so than previous episodes, I'm going to do a lot more reading in this one. So I could say bear with me, or I could say enjoy. I'm going to read some long dialogue scenes because I want to talk about many themes in this novel and reflect. A sneak preview, our last episode 6, we will talk a little bit, or maybe a lot, I don't know yet, about the novella Rabbit Remembered, which is 10 years after this one, which is the world of 2000, 2001, and the 1990s. And it's at the end of John Updike's life. And before I get out the TV now, I'm going to say this novel is, of course, about Rabbit, Harry Angstrom, and his all of his travails. And it's also about Harry Rabbit Angstrom at the end of his life. He has heart trouble, and he's going to die on the last page in this novel, with Nelson at his side. One of the last lines is, Dad, well, we'll get to that, but in the interest and service of close reading, or the close reading system, we are not living in a world, with this episode at least, of spoilers or concern about spoilers. We are delving into these books with a very close eye and sometimes ear. And that is the most important thing, the aesthetics of prose. But let's get out the TV and see John Updike. When I plan these series, I never know. There's all kinds of different ways to plan a series or a show. We can get rid of this absolutely ugly, garish, god-awful screensaver. There we go. What I was saying is, there's a lot of ways to plan a show like this. And for example, I knew that it was going to be a limited series, a mini-series. So I knew, for example, that this book lunch series on John Updike was not going to be 10 or 20 episodes. I knew that. I also knew it was going to be more than 3. But now I finalized the form and the structure of it. I'm very much moved when I do a show. I'm doing a show at the end of this month, a live stream about all about aesthetics, which is a really long. Am I at number 20 or 21? I think I have to check. I mean, I've done so many of them. That's been really rewarding, as much as it is a lot of work and effort on my part. But in that show, I'm going to talk more about volume and mass and things that take up space that you read. 20 is next. So Magic 20, and I'm excited about that. But I'm preparing for that episode, and I have to make a lot of decisions. How much am I going to show? If I'm going to show clips, for example. How much am I going to read from a text? Like today, I decided I would read a lot of the text because I want to make clear that John Updike is a master at all aspects of fiction, of fictional prose, by which I mean not just scenic description, not just the modernist gift from Flaubert and Henry James and company of free indirect style, weaving in and out of character and objectivity, somewhere in the middle, outside of dialogue and not omniscient narration. So dialogue, that, and also landscape descriptions, scene descriptions. And in this novel, a great deal of the landscape, I'm going to call it that, description, is of the junk and detritus and pop culture of America in that order, in those years. 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. So Coca-Cola and Playboy magazine and the TV shows. Just as in Rabbit is Rich, everybody's watching Charlie's Angels and listening to Donna Summer. Or like our main character, Rabbit is disappointed when Donna Summer is no longer on the air. And there's some kind of Christian rock song that's replaced her. I don't know. Is it Amy Grant? I can't tell. I'm not an expert on these things. In her place, or Tanya Tucker. And that's Updike's a little way of talking about changes of the dominant culture. When the dominant culture emphasizes that, it might be time for the rhythm and blues to move aside, and to Southern music to take its place, religiously oriented Southern music. Just to name one example, and of course, this is from a documentary. What's on here? There were a lot of documentaries in the 80s, especially in the 80s, and going into the 90s about fine art or high art creatives. You call them highbrow folks, poets and novelists, and as an attempt to connect with a larger audience. And this is one of those little documentaries. There's so many of this kind. They did these documentaries on Kurt Vonnegut Jr. It showed Kurt Vonnegut Jr. in a raincoat walking down the street and talking about how he comes up with Harrison Bergeron, or it's just one example that comes to mind. There are many of these. This is in that series, and this was produced, I think, by Penn State or University of Penn. Pennsylvania. And this is John Updike basically telling you what he thinks and where he comes from. That he comes from a certain place, and as everything on Journey of an Aesthete podcast, up front, first and foremost, is an awareness that we are embodied creatures, all of us, and that we are human type creatures and mammals. And as such, we come at the world with idiosyncratic preferences, points of view, biases all over the place. And when I say biases, I mean both biases that are positive as well as negative. I could be biased in favor of justice and equality. I could be biased, in the case we're going to hear from John Updike, our maestro author here, in favor of close-knit communities and small towns. Let's hear him talk about it. Before I play this, I'm going to talk about or mention the Copyright Act of our bicentennial year, 1976. Copyright Act of 1976. The material, all of this material, this video, reading from the novels, the books, the clips from YouTube or from old documentaries, all of that material is used for the purpose of commentary and criticism, which falls under the fair use doctrine of copyright law. It's an important phrase, fair use doctrine of copyright law. No copyright infringement is intended, and this disclaimer hopefully will serve us in good stead on this episode. So I've talked too long about this. Let's hear Updike talk about small towns and cities.
Shillington was a
Shillington,
small,
Pennsylvania.
Roughly about a mile square, cohesive town of about 5,000. There are many kinds of people who did not live in Shillington, which I've become aware of as I've moved, going out into the world. I didn't know that at the time. I was just aware of it as a kind of unit. In the 30s and 40s, when I was growing up there, it was the kind of town where the town cop would dress up as Santa Claus on Christmas afternoon and give you a box of candy in the town hall. It was, there was this sort of institutionalized coziness that was delightful to a child. It was helped, I think, by the Depression and the World War, which sort of froze. So at any rate, I've been looking all my life for towns, and I've lived by and large in small towns. By preference. I think they're a very natural, nice way for people to organize themselves. You are compelled to deal with your neighbor instead of being able to select out of a urban mass the people who think like you do or who do the same sort of things you do. The image of a high school meant extra much to me because my father taught at one, and I, of course, finally went.
I want us to reflect upon two things. Your host, MitchHampton, yours truly, is of the opposite preference to Mr. Updike. I love the biggest cities. I am a city slicker, so identified. I lived for 38 years of my adult life in big cities. So that's my bias, or that's why I come to these shows with that experience. I'm also a pluralist. I'm a pluralist before I'm anything else, actually, before many other things. And pluralists want there to be differences in the world. We don't take difference and diversity as something to just be tolerated or something to be overcome or ignored, although it can at times be, diversity itself can be most frustrating, inevitably, invariably, and it has its difficulties. But we take it to be what in an academic philosophical term coming in, one of my favorite, normatively. For we pluralists, pluralism is normative, so it's a good thing that Updike has his perspective and I have mine, that some people want to live in small towns. But I also want to focus on the virtues of the small town. As he said, you're kind of stuck with who you're around. There's this wonderful word that Joe Davis Woods, who's an upcoming guest and my girlfriend on the show, really great word, propinquity. It's propinquity, who you find yourself next to. And as he said, your next door neighbor, you don't pick your next door neighbor. And so it's interesting because what he's saying is that in a big city, like say in New York City or Detroit or Cleveland even, or Boston or Cambridge, DC, and places like that, because there are so many people, because there's 5 million, 6 million people, 4 million people, you could be more of a control freak. You could be more of a control freak and choose your people. Updike's saying that when you're in a small town, you're going to have to put up with who's next to you. And the person next to you, living next to you, might pose some challenges to you. They may play really loud music, or they might be a Republican. I mean, these are the challenges of living your next door neighbors. But my point is that these are different ways to live. And I have a quote here from our producer, I think. The true New Yorker secretly believes that people living anywhere else have to be, in some sense, kidding. Yes, that's true. That's going to take a drink of this Think coffee. I am right-handed, and of course they put the Think logo on so that only the left-handed would show the Think. So I'm cursed with right-handedness. Not only right-handed, I'm extremely right-handed. So excess of right-handedness. Won't go down that rabbit hole today, but I want to play one more clip of Updike because a little bit, and from this documentary.
To one, so that not only Rabbit Run, but many of my short stories are about high schools as.
Where are we here?
Lane and Cross.
They weren't rich, they weren't exactly poor either. That is, in the middle.
So
The sweet one.
I talked about Harry Angstrom, Janice, his wife, Ruth, his sometime lover, girlfriend, his son Nelson, his friends Thelma and Ronnie Harrison. These people, Coach Tethero, I think that was his name for the first novel, The Coach, Reverend Eccles, all these people are Pennsylvanians, and they would have all thought of themselves as middle class and a sensibility. And so that's part of it too. In other words, Updike is writing about something that is purports to be relatable to a lot of people and not just some people. So
His breath of mulching leaves,
just kind of
the delicate scratch of some bird in the living silence, the benevolent intricacy of moss and rocks and roots and ferns, all interlocked on some bank torn by an old logging trail. I did not tell them. I was a small town child.
Small town child. The filmmaker did a little.
I was, I think, very much aware of being in the middle. As a child, I neither lived in Reading nor in Mountain. We certainly weren't rich. We weren't exactly poor either. That is, we had a kind of comfy, biggish house, and most people live, in this sense, in the middle. America is mostly a country of people who think of themselves, at least, as middle class. There are very few people who will identify themselves as upper class, and not so many who would come out and say, I'm lower class. So it's a country of the middle. It's a bourgeois country. And I have written about people in the middle because those are the people I know, and also out of choice, out of a conviction that this is the mass of these people, the people in the United States of America in this century at least, and that therefore this is where I must plant my flag as an artist, and this is where I must find things to say.
So he's telling us he must plant his flag as an artist in the middle class. And of course, when I use the phrase middle class, I'm using it not to refer to an objective income bracket or an objective wage or salary or what's upon us now, tax return or W-40 or whatever the different terms. It's more of a spiritual matter, a sensibility matter of the temperament of being in the middle, involving the quotidian. But I think it's time now to get to the text. So I'm going to embark, turn this off. It's been really a joy to share with you my love for John Updike in all these episodes. Just as it was a joy to share Hannah Arendt, or anything else that we do or I've done. These two people I mentioned just now are among the greats of the last century. Sometimes I think indeed of any century, and I'm going to get out Rabbit at Rest. But it's really a joy to talk about things that are that rich and that, meaningful. I never quite know everything down to the last detail when I do a show. As I said earlier, some things are left to chance. Even these very sentences I'm speaking to you now were more unplanned, and they're coming out. But I do have a sense of gratitude for these artists and philosophers, in the case of Arendt, for leaving us all this stuff that we can go over and think about and reflect upon as embodied creatures. Embodied, some say fallen creatures. We are certainly noble creatures too, but we are creatures and we have histories and we embody temporality of beginnings, middles, and ends, as we'll get in the case this novel ends. So let me get out my glasses, talk about where we are. So when we last left off, remember Nelson was more or less preaching to his mom, Janice, about the virtues of Coke, not the drink, and how he's on top of the world and he's selling. But in truth, as we're going to find out in this novel, he is abusing that drug, as many did in those years. And he is quite awful and really harming the Toyota dealership that he and his dad, Rabbit, take over and run from Janice's dad, the Brewer Toyota dealership, and he's even stealing money, thousands and thousands of dollars. I think it's $100,000, I believe. He's stolen to fuel his Coke habit, and that's happening. There's a 4th of July parade in this novel in which Harry Angstrom, Rabbit, dresses up like Uncle Sam with one of those tailcoats, and red, white, and blue. And people from the crowd say, "Hey, Rabbit, I remember you when you played basketball. You scored, this kind of stuff." That's a scene in this novel. So where should we start? I think it would be interesting. Where are we here? Another thing that happens in this novel is that, Rabbit is sick and he's in the hospital, and Prue, Nelson's wife, comes to visit him, and they bond. Not only do they bond, but they have sex. And I want to read some from this sex scene. Rabbit having sex with his son's wife, Prue, because what leads up to it, it's interesting. In a way, they feel like he might die. He's in his hospital bed, and this is Prue complaining about Nelson. Again, we're going to do more dialogue in this episode because Updike is again, not only description, but dialogue. Updike's dialogue is Aaron Sorkin and QT Tarantino have nothing on Updike in terms of greatness of dialogue. Anyhow, we'll get it, or Pinter. I mean, they're equal. I'm just saying they don't. All right. Prue's saying, talking about Nelson, I have no use for him anymore. I'm scared to fuck him. I'm scared to be legally associated with him. I've wasted my life. You don't know what it's like. You're a man. You're free. You can do what you want in this life. Until you're 60, at least, you're a buyer. A woman's a seller. She has to be. And she better not haggle too long. I'm 34. I've had my shot, Harry. I wasted it on Nelson. I had my little hand of cards and played them, and now I'm folded. I'm through. My husband hates me, and I hate him, and we don't even have any money to split up. I'm scared, so scared. And my kids are scared too. I'm trash, and they're trash, and they know it. Unquote. And then Harry responds, Rabbit responds with this, hey, he has to say, come on, nobody's trash. But even as he says it, he knows this is an old-fashioned idea he would have trouble defending. We're all trash, really. This is not in quotes. This is free indirect. This is indirect style. This is narration. So I want to make clear, it's not him. The only thing he says to Prue is, come on, nobody's trash. And this is the internal. I'm sure that's clear. We're all trash, really. Without God to lift us up and make us into angels, we're all trash. Now, I want to quote a little bit from the sex scene. Now, why am I doing this? Well, I didn't quote it all from the explicit, as we would have said back in the day, hardcore sex scene from Rabbit is Rich between Thelma and Rabbit, only to excerpt their conversation where, remember, Thelma admonishes him, don't think about Cindy and the Bo Derricks and the 20-somethings, and you want to be with me. We're both 40, equality and all that, and, even power dynamics, as they would say today, not then, would be the phrase or the idea. And so you should want to fuck me. I just want to quote because it's really interesting of how one thing that Updike loves to do is take things that are very sometimes crude, sometimes ugly or just homely, and try to just make as much beauty out of it as he can. Do I want to read? I don't know. Second thought. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Again, this is a guy in his more or less in his hospital bed. He's has this disease. He's kind of dying, and this is our main character. And also the present tense, the power of the present tense. Remember the first line from Rabbit Run? Boys are playing basketball is the first clause. And here, she is left-handed, he remembers. The oddity of this excites him further. Not waiting too long to think about it, he, with his free hand, lifts hers from his chest and places it lower where an erection has surprisingly sprouted from his half-shaved groin. Then later on, he says, their kiss, when they kiss, tastes so much of the fish she has so nicely prepared. It's lemon and chives and of asparagus. So she brought him food, I guess, in the hospital, right? Which people do. Rain whips at the screen. The leak onto the windowsill accelerates its tapping. A brilliant closed flash shocks the air everywhere, and less than a second later, a heart-stopping crack and splintering of thunder crushes the house from above. As if an overflow of this natural heedlessness. I just want to stop here on this prose. It's so great. I'm gonna reread that. A brilliant close flash shocks the air everywhere, and less than a second later, a heart-stopping crack and splintering of thunder crushes the house from above, as if in overflow of this natural heedlessness. So they're heedless. This is choice of words and deciding to have sex, heedless. Prue says shit. Jumps from the bed, slams shut the window, pulls down the shade, tears open her bathrobe and sheds it. And reaching down, pulls her nightie up over her head. And so it ends. So, of course, everybody in the novel finds out about this and hates it. Updike is not above or using drama and suspense to stoke reader's interest, although there's larger purposes involved with that. But I want to get to Nelson enters treatment. So as I said from last episode, he's saying, "Oh, Mom, Coke is great. Coke is it." And now he's saying he's stolen this money from the Brewer Motors, from Toyota, and he's going to enter rehab. And I want to read from. Remember, suppose I was just saying, the son talks to the mom, Janice, and she's not buying his bullshit or his BS about the Coke, right? But this is Nelson after his treatment, where Nelson has had a spiritual awakening while he was in rehab. And I want to read from the scene in which he's trying to describe to his father what AA means and meant to him. Beautiful dialogue passage. I got to find it first. Okay, here we are. I guess it's a family gathering, and so Nelson's kids, Ron, the little one, and Judy, because he's had kids. Nelson's had kids with Prue, right? Having some kind of dinner. I'm going to start from here, leading into the dialogue. The children eat with them, Judy and Harry on one side of the Springer's mahogany dining room table, set as if for a holiday. So it's not a holiday, but it's set as if for a holiday. And this is, of course, Nelson's big return from the hospital or from the treatment center, right? I just wanted to interject that. I didn't mean to violate Updike's prose. I just wanted to clarify. Set as if for a holiday, Janice and Roy on the other, Judy and Harry on one side, Janice and Roy on the other, Prue and Nelson at the heads. Nelson offers grace. He makes them all hold hands and shut their eyes after they're ready to scream with embarrassment, pronounces the words, quote, peace, health, sanity, love, unquote. Amen, says Prue, sounding scared. Let me continue. Judy can't stop staring up at Harry to see what he makes of it. Nice, he tells his son. That's something you learned at that detox place? Not detox, Dad. Rehab. Whatever it was full of religion? You got to admit you're powerless and dependent on a higher power. That's our first principle of AA and NA. As I remember it, you didn't have much use for higher power stuff. I didn't, and still don't in the form that Orthodox religion presents it in. All you have to believe in is a power greater than ourselves, God as we understand him. Everything sounds so definite and pat. Harry has to fight the temptation to argue. No, great, he says. Anything that gets you through the night. That's great, Nelson. Yeah, you do your thing. Anything that gets you through the night, as Sinatra says. Mim had quoted that to him once. Mim, of course, is Rabbit's sister. In this Spooner house tonight, Harry feels a huge and regretful distance from Mim and Mom and Pop and all that sunken, God-fearing Jackson Road 30s, 40s, the decades, 1930s, 1940s world. You used to believe a lot of that stuff, Nelson tells him. I do, Rabbit says, irritating the kid. He knows, with his amiability. But he has to add, hallelujah. When they stuck that catheter into my heart, I saw the light. Nelson announces, they tell you at the center that there'll be people who mock you for going straight. But they don't say one of them will be your own father. I'm not mocking anything. Jesus, have all the peace and love and sanity you want. I'm all for it. We're all for it, right, Rory? The little boy stares angrily at being suddenly singled out. His loose, wet lower lip begins to tremble. He turns his face towards his mother's side. Prue tells Harry in a soft, directed voice, in which he does sense a certain mist of acknowledgement. These Updike phrases, mist of acknowledgement, heedlessness, these word choices, mist of acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is a very abstract concept. It's a very real thing, but it's very abstract. And to give it a mist, mist of acknowledgement, of rain splashing at a screen window. Roy's been very upset readjusting to Nelson's coming back. I know how he feels, Harry says. We'd all gotten used to his not being around. Nelson looks toward Janice and protests and appeal, and she says, Nelson, tell us about this counseling work you did, in the fake tone of one who has already heard about it. Mostly, Nelson's going to say, you just listen and let them work it out through their own verbalization. You don't have to say much. Just show you're willing to wait and listen. The most hardened street kids, even they eventually open up. Once in a while, you have to remind them that you've been there yourself. So their war stories don't impress you. A lot have been dealers, and when they start bragging about how much money they made, all you have to do is ask, where is it now? They don't have it. Nelson tells the listening table, his own staring children, they blew it. Speaking of blowing it, Harry begins. Now, of course, as you know, Nelson stole from Toyota. Toyota ships. Nelson overrides him with his steady voice sermon. So Nelson, the way is preaching here. He's it's very sincere and it's very truthful. But he has the floor. He has the stage of this table. It's a steady voice sermon. Notice Updike says it's steady voiced. Steady voice sermon. Which means that it's related to steadfast. And there's a truth in there, of course. And so Nelson overrides him with the steady voice sermon. You try to get them to see themselves that they are addicts, that they weren't outsmarting anybody. The realization has to come from them from within. It's not something they can accept imposed on them by you. Your job is to listen. Again, listen. Most important thing. It's your silence mostly that leads them past their own internal traps. You start talking, they start resisting. It takes patience and faith. Faith that the process will work, and it does. It invariably does. It's thrilling to see it happen again and again. People want to be helped. They know things are wrong. That's the absolute dumbest idea I've ever heard, Harry says promptly. Where's the money in it? So his dad is asking him, how are you going to make money from helping these people? It's like basically, what kind of job is that? Being a therapist or being a drug counselor? It's not selling Toyotas. I mean, see, these are the qualities that make people hate our main character, right? Everybody hates Rabbit, Harry Engstrom. Why, Mr. Updike? Why, John Updike, did you put such an unsympathetic, clueless character? Well, because they exist in the world, and because he wanted to, and also because this novel is also Nelson's story. In some ways, more than Rabbit's, Harry's. Even though Harry's going to die in the novel, it's Nelson Engstrom's story. See, so there's that too. The dumbest idea of it. Where's the money in it? You're dealing with people who have no money because they've blown it all for drugs. Nelson is going into something a little bit more like his old self. He whines, there's grant money, dad, federal money, state, even do nothing George Bush admits we got to do something. You've got 20 employees you fucked up over there at the law, and most of them have families. What happens to the mechanics in service? What about your sales reps? What about poor little Elvira? They can get other jobs. It's not the end of the world. People don't stick with jobs the way your scared generation did. Yeah, scared. With your generation on the loose, we got reason to be scared. How would you ever turn that cement block shed over there into a hospital? It wouldn't be a hospital. You've already got $150,000 on the hole to Toyota Inc. and 2 weeks to pay it off. Not to mention the $75,000 you owe Brewer Trust. Okay, so there's a deal that he works out. Nelson works out with the bank to get a loan. It's complicated to repay because they're sort of coming down hard. They say, well, we're going to I think even Janice says, his mom said, we're going to prosecute you, Nelson. So this is a kind of working this out. But I just wanted to as I said, John Updike covers everything that's going on in society. So if people are using drugs and going to AA or NA, not only will Updike cover it, he'll be true to the spirit of what the meaning of that is for his characters, such as this character. And that's rather important. It'll be even more important in our final novel, Rabbit Remembered, as we'll see. And so Dad is being cynical, of course. There's a fight scene at a funeral. So Thelma Harrison dies. Thelma, of course, is the woman that they agree to swap. That we agree to have sex with Ronnie's wife. And so, as everybody knows, in this novel, everybody wanted Sydney, but Rabbit says, I'll settle for Thelma. But it turns out that he and Thelma have a ongoing sexual relationship. But then Thelma dies. And there's this, at the funeral, Ronnie Harrison and Rabbit have a really bitter, awful fight. And I just want to, again, more dialogue, the bitter dialogue between these two men. I should say our main character Rabbit hates Ronnie, but I should say that in Rabbit Remembered coming up, after Harry Engstrom or Rabbit dies, guess who Janice marries? Symmetry. Janice marries Ronnie. Well, here's Ronnie going at, yelling at Rabbit. You think I don't know you were Bane and Thel for years? I've never thought much about what you know or don't know, Ronnie. You son of a bitch. That night we swapped down on the islands was just the beginning, wasn't it? You kept seeing her up here. Ron, I thought you said you knew. You should have asked Thelma if you were curious. I didn't want to hassle her. She was fighting to live, and I loved her. Toward the end, we talked about it. So you did hassle her. She wanted to clear the slate. You son of a bitch. You're the coldest, most selfish bastard I ever met. Why? What makes me so bad? Maybe she wanted me. Maybe the favors were mutual. Now, if you recall that in that scene, I did not read you this passage, but she goes on and on about how much she loves Harry's cock and Harry's prick and how she's adored him. And she says, I've wanted you for 20 years. And they're, just rhapsodic. So this is not a case of people not wanting to do what they're doing. On the other hand, there is Ronnie and his feelings. And so as limited though he is, and he's more limited and he's worse character in my view than Rabbit. But that, it's interesting. So, but I like the bite of the language. He says, Rabbit comes back, you disgust me. You always have, Ron. You got a prick where your head ought to be. Who can blame her if Thelma gave herself a little vacation from eating your shit now and then? It goes on but it's just to give you a little sense of the bitterness between these two men in 1989 or whenever it is, 89, 90, we want to say, in America, in Pennsylvania, fighting over now past deceased woman, Thelma Harrison, who adored Harry, adored him, and gave him a lecture about how they're supposed to be with each other because of their right age. As she said, you should be fucking me, is to put it in her phrase. Not fucking these young, hot college co-ed, you have to fuck me. And now her husband is fighting Rabbit. So these are the kinds of, in a way, the things that make up these novels. Some more italicized, boldface. See this? I love what you do for me, Toyota. That is the new paper banner the company has set down to hang in a big display window. So again, Updike's always going to use what the big thing of the era is. If the big thing is Toyota, he's going to use the exact ad campaign that was the ad campaign in that year. I love what you do for me, Toyota. And of course, there's long descriptions here of the dealership and the surrounding areas. Poetic, rhapsodic, imagistic. Don't know what words to use of that. As often in Updike's novels, at the end or in critical moments, there's what I call a travel scene, where Rabbit will be running or traveling on foot, maybe, or in a car, down streets. And that happens again here. But Nelson is with him at the end. Nelson is with him in the end. And he's pleading for his dad to not die. He says, can't you say anything? Talk to me, Dad. The kid is yelling. Or trying not to yell. His face white in the gills with the strain of it. And some unaskable question tweaking the hairs of one's eyebrow so they grow up against the grain. Grow up against the grain language. He wants to put the kid out of his misery. Nelson, he wants to say, you have a sister. But does he say it? His son's anxious, straining expression hasn't changed. What he says next, though, shows he may have understood the word sister. We phone Aunt Mim, Dad, and she'll get here as soon as she can. She has to change planes in Kansas City. From the expression and pitch of his voice, the boy is shouting into a fierce wind blowing from his father's direction. So understand that we're indoors. We're in a hospital room. A man's dying, but yet there's a fierce wind blowing from Rabbit, from his father's direction. "Don't die, Dad, don't die," he cries, and sits back with that question still on his face, and his dark, wet eyes shining like stars of a sort. Notice Updike doesn't say shining like stars. He says shining like stars of a sort. Harry shouldn't leave the question hanging like that. The boy depends on him. "Well, Nelson," he says, "all I could tell you, it isn't so bad." Rabbit thinks he should say more. The kid looks wildly expectant. "But enough. Period. Maybe. Period. Enough. Period." The last two words in the novel. Maybe enough. So Rabbit is rich, Rabbit at rest, maybe enough. Maybe we've had enough of this series, I think Updike's also saying. It's time to conclude. And this was going to be the last novel, with Rabbit dying. But he got the itch to write. He got the itch to write about the kids. Annabelle, which is his daughter from Ruth, and Nelson, and some other characters. In other words, our generation, Gen Xers, the kids. Now, in this novel, we get another sneak preview. One of the nurses at the hospital, when he's recovering from the heart attack, says that her name is Annabelle. And she says, "Didn't you know my mom, Ruth?" And so he says, "Oh, yeah, I knew your mom." And we get to learn more about Annabelle in the final installation. So I'm going to talk a little extemporaneously now about Updike and about these novels before we conclude. It's been interesting to reread all these books. As you might remember, I read them first as they came out, which involved me being in a couple of instances a child, a boy, a teenager, and then a young adult. One of the novels, Rabbit Run, the very first, I had the greatest fortune to read with Jack Driscoll as my teacher. The great late Jack Driscoll, who I talked about on this series at Interlochen Arts Academy. And I believe I read not just Ken Kesey, but Kurt Vonnegut, and Tom McGuane and Jim Harrison, but also Rabbit Run. And that would have been the second time in the mid-'80s. But I'm rereading these novels now in 2024, 2025. And I want to say that all of these books have in them something that's at one and the same time evanescent or fleeting. You know, Toyota ad campaign that's only of 1 year. Using the term swapping to talk about opening up sexual relationships. Donna Summer's hot stuff. I don't know. A fashion, fleeting. If we want to be more high-minded about it, we could say evanescent. Okay? But I feel that all of it is also, I want to say, timeless. Just as the attitudes of our main character, especially some of his more, I should say, objectively wrong or bad attitudes, are pervasive today, in some instances more so, might even be said to attempt to run our lives even. They haven't gone anywhere. There's also the eternal aspect of being embodied creatures that make things like novels. And that's continues. We're in a time now where we can look at all of the past simultaneously on these screens that were invented, that we're looking at now, hopefully, if you're watching the show. And we can look back at a Toyota campaign or a Coke bottle or Roy Lichtenstein, painting of a cartoon or some such thing, the pop art that John Updike talked about in our episode last week, and the clothes and the bell bottoms and the golf slacks. And we could see them now with the benefit, as they say, of hindsight. And the other thing too, I want to say, is that we want to have a recording of what we've done and who we've been, and a recording of all of it, not just some of it. We don't want to have an accounting and recording of only our best moments, of only our triumphs and our luck and those kinds of things. But we also want to have a record of our mistakes, our errors, our crimes, our follies, our vanities. And that's why we need someone like a John Updike. It's not the only reason why we would need him. There are irreducible virtues of prose itself, the choice of language, the clauses, the wind blowing from Updike's direction in the room, in the hospital room. There's a wind. Maybe it's an ill wind, or maybe it's a wind. Doing things with language, doing things with words, in much the same ways that you might do something with an image in a film. It might be Pamela Anderson screaming and wailing towards the ceiling and crumbling into a fetal position next to a wardrobe rack of dresses. It might be that in the movie The Last Showgirl. So it doesn't just have to be words. It could be an image, or it could be chords, Chords. Rhythm, poetry, color, and all of these things. And it's I feel very grateful that I can come and share all this stuff with you on our show, Journey Evidence Thief Podcast. And please subscribe to us if you can, and like us. And at the end of the month, we will talk about physical. We had talked about network television. We talked about physical magazines and some of their creators. And there's also a concert coming up too. On Easter, I will play with my trio in about a week. So thank you. And I do hope, as this is Friday, that you have a great weekend. Thanks.